IMF has approved the immediate disbursement of 55.1 billion shillings loan to Kenya. This completes the fourth review of the 38-month arrangements under the Extended Credit Facility and the Extended Fund Facility arrangements approved in April 2nd, 2021. And as Bushebi Jr. reports, pundits have opined that foreign direct investment and increased trade will be more effective than borrowing as long as the business environment is attractive to investors.
The Executive Board of the International Monetary Fund IMF on Monday, December 19th, approved the immediate disbursement of 55.1 billion shillings loan to Kenya.
Wakenya mkonja! Wakenya mkonja! Wakenya mkonja! This is the constitution.
This board's decision completes the fourth review of the 38-month arrangements under the Extended Credit Facility ECF and the Extended Fund Facility EFF arrangements approved in April 2021. This means that Kenya has so far received under the EFF and ECF arrangements a total of 203.8 billion shillings. The Extended Fund Facility and the Extended Credit Facility arrangements were aimed at supporting Kenya's program to address debt vulnerabilities, tracking the COVID-19 pandemic and global shocks, and to enhance governance and broader economic reforms. The IMF said, and I quote, "Kenya's economy remains resilient against a challenging global backdrop and is projected to grow 5.3% in 2022. Inflation moved above the Central Bank of Kenya's target band in June and is expected to peak in early 2023. It also said, despite double-digit export growth, the current account is expected to widen on a higher global oil prices in 2022. Downside risks predominate in the near term, while Kenya's medium-term outlook remains favorable, although climate-related risks are elevated." End of quote. The global lender says that there is progress on Kenya's fiscal consolidation as public debt has begun to level off. It said, and I quote, "Taxes performed strongly in financial year 2021-2022 while spending compressed on shortfalls in external commercial financing, leading to an overperformance of 1.7% of GDP in the primary deficit." However, IMF is worried about the obligations carried over from the last fiscal year and an increase in unbudgeted spending in early financial year 2022-2023, which are increasing pressures on the budget. Nonetheless, President William Ruto's administration has asserted Kenya's commitment to fiscal consolidation, targeting a lower overall fiscal deficit than the original budget. President William Ruto in July said that if elected president in the August 2022 general elections, his first assignment will be to deal with Kenya's national debt. Speaking during the presidential debate, Ruto said that should the Kenya Kwanza Alliance make the next government, they would go slow on borrowing, put brakes on unbudgeted projects, and raise revenues to address the national debt that currently stands at 8.4 trillion shillings.
Of renegotiating our debt, Honorable Ruto, you just last week in an interview with the international press said you will not be entertaining discussions around renegotiating our debt. In fact, with respect to your competitor who is not here with us today, when he brought up the issue, you in fact called his statement on that condescending and reckless. Mr. Deputy President, are you tonight changing your position and saying you will renegotiate and seek to restructure our debt?
Not at all. I still believe, as I stand here, that it is reckless for anybody to say we cannot pay our debts. We must think of how we must slow down on borrowing locally and see how we can externalize government borrowing. And it doesn't have to be borrowing. Some of the programs, we must get the stock exchange to take up some of the areas of raising revenue. The stock exchange is a wonderful instrument. We saw it when we were selling the shares of Safaricom.
The national debt is a concern not just to Kenyans, but to development partners with whom he said have raised an issue citing the continued borrowing by the national government. According to Ruto, majority of funds had been redirected to projects that he said had been unbudgeted for.
Talk about that and specifically address that.
The issue of what we must do about our fiscal consolidation is something that is so clear in my mind. When I came into office, my first act as president was to get rid of all the subsidies that were distorting different sectors of our markets.
You mentioned a few companies, Your Excellency, that you had met with. I know you also met with Delta, speaking about what to do about Kenya Airways. When you talk about this partnership, you said a win-win partnership. What would that look like with Kenya Airways and Delta? And would you be open to selling a majority stake in Kenya Airways to potentially see the airline take off?
I am willing to sell the whole airline.
The Treasury's Cabinet Secretary manages the revenues and expenditures of the country. The government gets its revenue from taxes, grants, debts, and dividends paid by state-owned enterprises. The Treasury delegates powers to raise such revenues. On the spending side, the ministry has to contend with the dictates of other institutions like Parliament, the Central Bank, and multilateral organizations like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Decisions have to be made about how the revenue is shared and used for recurrent expenditure like paying salaries and debt, and for development such as building roads and hospitals. In Kenya, the decision is complicated by another factor. The money must be shared with 47 counties. Pundits have argued that debt tabs will not close during Ruto's tenure. The debt ceiling may be raised again in the new administration. Given the country's budget deficit, which is about 6.2% of annual production or GDP, borrowing is bound to continue. At the moment, Kenya borrows equally from local and foreign lenders. Ruto wants Kenyans to save more, reducing the need for external borrowing. This is unlikely in the short run because of the poverty levels. People save after taking care of the basics like food and shelter.
If you consider that in a whole year, right, the 14-year-old's pocket money is 100 shillings, just consider that, or say for a month, right? Our debt position is such that right now, for that 100 shillings that he expects as his monthly allowance, 60 shillings straight away is a debt, which means it's not his income. You owe it to somebody else to have to give out that.
So he has only 40 shillings.
So he has only 40 shillings of income, right? So, and the way you do that is you are assuming that for the whole country, all our income for a year, which is what an economist calls GDP. So if you aggregate that, the equivalent of that is that if we had to extinguish all our debt today, we would have to pay 60% of that, which means we would work 8 months in the year, actually close to 9 months in the year, just paying our debts, and then have to survive on everything else for the last 3.5 or so months. Now that's how serious it is. The acceptable portion is usually between 30 to 40%. So basically, that's what it tells you. We are double what is considered the safe and the decent level. The first thing that the 14-year-old should know then is that it's not business as usual, right? For every 100 shillings that he has, 60 shillings has been claimed by his debtor. So if he's going to pay his debt, the first thing he needs to do, I'm not taking any more debt. That would be a useful one. Just cap it and save it. Secondly, he has to scale back on the things and plans that he has had for the pocket money that his parents provide. So one of the things then he would have to say is, what is it as some of the luxuries that I could? What are some of the things that I owed? But most importantly, I must make sure my debt is not growing further. Or the 14-year-old has to get the impression that I cannot rely on only the money that I get at my pocket money. I've got to get some work, which is basically to supplement my income that I get from my my guaranteed income with something else. That's not an option that's available to a country, but I'm just trying to use a basic example about what options are available to.
Inflation is also likely to remain an issue. Will interest rate hikes slow down inflation? Will government raise wages and salaries to cushion workers? Could cutting taxes be a better option despite fears of stoking inflation? These are the questions that Kenyans are asking. On the other hand, others have opined that foreign direct investment and increased trade would be more effective than borrowing as long as the business environment is attractive to investors. However, the question remains, will Ruto's government be different and stop the borrowings? Time will tell. For Maisha Prime, Maisha Television, I'm Bushabe Jr.